and welcome to today's webinar where we're going to be talking about a very important topic, which is tips on inclusive experience as well as accommodations for hiring individuals with disabilities. Now, let's start with just some introductions. I'm Julia Mendez, and I'm a Principal Business Consultant with PeopleFluence Research Institute, and I'm part of the Workforce Compliance and Diversity Division, where I've worked with the organization as a consultant and trainer on equal employment opportunity, diversity, and affirmative action matters for the past 23 years out of our New Orleans area office. And with me today, I have the pleasure of introducing the two speakers that I'll be interviewing today. So Lisa Mayberry, she is a program manager for the Autism and Disability Hiring Programs at Microsoft. She graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in social welfare and has enjoyed taking her passion for connecting people with resources to the tech space. Lisa's working toward the ultimate goal to decrease unemployment and underemployment for people with disabilities. A Pacific Northwest native, when not at Microsoft, you can find her wrangling her 4-year-old son and exploring all that Seattle has to offer. Thank you so much, Lisa, for being one of our panelists.
And Julia, can you advance to the next slide?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And then next we have Sarah Polano, who is a Senior Account Manager for Getting Hired. Sarah consults employers on how to create an inclusive workplace and organization for hiring individuals with disabilities through Getting Hired's full-service disability recruitment solution. As part of this solution, she facilitates Getting Hired's disability etiquette and awareness training for employers. She's also a member of the All For Diversity Council with Getting Hired's sister company, Allegis Global Solutions, which celebrates and raises awareness of diversity within the organization and in the communities that they serve. Sarah's passion comes from her previous work as a teacher's aide at a nonprofit arts and education center for individuals with disabilities. She attributes much of her passion for advocating for individuals with disabilities and helping them find gainful employment to this experience, in addition to having family members with disabilities and being a caregiver to those family members. So thank you, Sarah, as well, for being one of our panelists today. And I have to say that I, too, have loved ones who have disabilities, and so this is a topic that is very important to me as well. Now, today what we hope to cover, we're pleased to be learning about Microsoft and all that Microsoft does in the area of disabilities for its employees and applicants. So we'll learn about how Microsoft is ensuring that it has an inclusive environment for both consumers as well as job seekers who have disabilities. We're also going to discuss some key components to creating a successful recruiting and hiring initiative for individuals with disabilities. And I know when I talk to companies, this is an area that I'm hearing a lot of people wanting to know, where can I go, what can I do to increase the likelihood of attracting individuals with disabilities to apply for positions with their companies. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some common misconceptions that people have regarding working with people that have some form of a disability, whether it's a physical disability or a mental disability. But now let's first get an overview of the disability landscape. So Sarah, I want to go ahead and turn it over to you to kick us off. If you can first start by providing us with a definition of what is a disability for those who maybe they think they know what is a disability but aren't quite sure of what it entails.
Sure. Absolutely, Julia. That's a great question and a great place for us to start. According to the Americans with Disability Act, or ADA, as many of you may know it as, a person with a disability can be defined as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So it's really important to remember that your disability status can change, disabilities can be acquired, and over 70% of disabilities are non-apparent. Outside of the stereotypical examples that I like to say of what comes to mind when you think of the word disability, which includes being deaf or hard of hearing, blind or low vision, or having an apparent disability that requires use of a wheelchair, examples also include PTSD, major depression, diabetes, epilepsy, dyslexia, and lupus, all of which can be non-apparent. So to elaborate on what I just mentioned as well, an example of a changing disability status could be if you have injuries resulting from an accident. You may need an accommodation to help perform your job, depending on what those injuries are and while you are recovering. And another example is if you're diagnosed with cancer. Your status has now changed to having a disability while you're going through treatment, but that status can also change back to not identifying as having a disability during remission. Both of those examples I just mentioned can also be considered as acquired disabilities, but I'll give you a more general and simple example as well. As your workforce ages during their lifetime with your company, there will most likely be a change in some employees' vision. So really just alluding to the fact that people may need glasses or contacts, or their prescription may change as they age during their lifetime with your company. Some accommodations could include larger monitors, screen readers, or for you to just ensure all of your Word and Excel documents are fully accessible if you're using any of those programs during your meetings or during your everyday workday. 1 in 5 Americans has a disability. That's a statistic I always like to use, and we therefore really wanted to set the stage with how many people disability can apply to present day, but also think about, again, with those acquired disabilities and the fact that disability status can change, how many of your employees it could apply to in the future as well.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I wanted to interject too with the time that I did some counseling work for a little bit of time, and one of the most common mental disabilities that people have in the United States and probably all around the world is anxiety, and oftentimes people have anxiety along with another disability such as depression. So more than likely people who are listening right now have a mental disorder or know someone that has a mental disorder. So I'm glad we're having this discussion too, just to get the word out that this is probably more common than when you might be aware that it actually is. So I want to turn our attention to accessibility tips now that we understand a little bit more about what is considered to be a disability. So what are some things that we can do in the workplace to make it accessible? So Sarah, I want to turn it over to you, first of all, to define what it means to be accessible. What does the word accessibility mean when referring to the workplace especially?
Sure. So accessibility is defined as the design of products, devices, services, and/or environments for people of varying abilities. This can include a couple different definitions in terms of accessibility or design that I wanted to go over. So this can include universal design, meaning accessibility of items that benefit both people with and without disabilities, an example being voice commands on your phone. It can include physical accessibility related to physical access to buildings and offices within your buildings, digital accessibility like having captioning on all of your videos that are on your company's website or your YouTube channel, and then assistive technology as well like screen readers that you might need for your computer or even for your phone.
And thank you for that. And I realize because some of the work that I do is reviewing clients might ask for me to do a review of their website, just a quick review to see if I notice anything that's out of compliance, especially if they've got federal contracts. When you've got federal contracts, you're an affirmative action employer, there are certain requirements. And one is to have the statement, at least on your website, to let people know how to apply. But website accessibility is a big issue for many applicants with disabilities. We often hear about individuals with visual impairments. They're not able to utilize a screen reader to apply for a job online. But this could also impact, like you said, people who have other types of disabilities like hearing impairment or even epilepsy. So sometimes people have a website with a lot of flashing going on. Be careful with that because that could trigger a disability. So I want to turn it over to you, Lisa, to ask you, how is Microsoft ensuring an inclusive environment through accessibility, not just for your consumers, but also for those who are trying to apply for a job at Microsoft who have a disability?
Absolutely. Thank you. So first, I just want to say that at our company, accessibility is huge for a bunch of different reasons, partially because we want to make sure that our consumers are as wide of a base as we possibly can, and to miss out on representing products that are accessible to the 1 billion different people in the world that have disabilities would be a huge missed opportunity for us. So selfishly, we're doing it because we should and we need to. But this website here is the accessibility site for Microsoft. So if you were to navigate to microsoft.com/accessibility, you can view some of the videos and some of the different tips that we post on our website to educate people on how to use our tools to provide an inclusive environment for people either in your business or in your home as well. For our job seekers, we're going to create these products that people love and have a mindset where we're being inclusive for our technology. We also need to hire people with disabilities to help inform those practices. So if you were to visit our career site today, you'd see right below the search bar for positions a link to request assistance in the application and hiring process. We want people to know, even before they've been selected, that they can ask for help, and we want them to have every opportunity in the process to be successful. We still have a ways to go to make sure that every person is able to use the site, but we've taken some steps to ensure digital accessibility. The site is compatible with screen reading technology. It has the correct contrast settings. Images are in the correct order and are all equipped with alt text. So someone who's blind or has low vision is navigating our website. All of the images that you would see on a site like this are equipped with that alternative text. So if you were to hover over them or use a screen reader, there would be a description of every image. We have an extensive team dedicated to accessibility to make sure that our tools are up to speed, as well as a help desk to make sure that any candidates' concerns or any consumers' concerns are addressed if for some reason they're not able to apply or are not able to use our products or our website.
That's excellent. And you mentioned the alt text. So can you tell us a little bit of what that means? Because that often is the issue that people with visual impairments are having when they're trying to use a screen reader. So for those who are listening in that don't understand why that's important, I know a lot of people want their websites to look visually pleasing and might use a lot of pictures, but they might not know how that impacts someone who's visually impaired using a screen reader. Can you talk just a little bit about what that alt text means?
Sure. So if you visit a website that is inclusive, you can hover over an image and see a description of that image within the alternative text. And most images now on the internet are actually equipped with that, but they're not necessarily very descriptive. So we're looking at the slide right now. Let's say picking the image above neurodiversity as an example. An example of a bad alternative text would be photo, or if it was more descriptive and you actually were conveying the meaning of the image, the alternative text could be woman using a laptop sitting next to her son. So that way the website conveys all of the meaning that you're absorbing as someone who is sighted to someone who is blind or low vision as well. That's what you want to ensure.
Thank you so much for that. And for those of you tuning in who are like a retailer, so I imagine a company who's trying to sell things online, if you're trying to buy a shirt, it would have a description of perhaps the style, the color of the shirt, the materials that the shirts are made of. When you simply have pictures on the screen, that would be helpful to someone who's visually impaired using a screen reader. So I also want to ask you, I find that many job interviewers are simply not trained on the proper etiquette when communicating with someone who does disclose that they have a disability or they have an obvious disability when they're looking at someone face-to-face in an interview. So not much, or they haven't given much thought on how to make the interview process inclusive for someone who might have a disability. So can you talk a moment about what Microsoft has done proactively to make their interview process fully inclusive?
Sure. So for our inclusive hiring events, we try to do everything intentionally to ensure that we're removing barriers for people with disabilities, starting by providing disability etiquette training to all of our interviewers to make sure that they're prepared for the day and ready to provide an inclusive experience. We also invite our candidates to meet with other employees with disabilities at Microsoft before their interviews to give them the opportunity to network. And we allow our candidates to have extra time between interviews to decompress, and also allow our candidates during technical interviews to code on personal devices, which provides an extra level of comfort, but also ensures that they're able to use any assistive technology that they're familiar with. So our interview processes through our inclusive hiring programs are siloed into two separate programs. We have an autism hiring program and a cross-disability segment hiring program. And some of the accommodations that I described earlier apply to both of those programs. But the autism hiring program is a little bit different in that it's designed specifically for those candidates, those neurodiverse candidates who were providing a different experience too.
Can you mention like an example of what might be something that's been done or that you might see happening as far as an accessible interview process request from someone with a disability? Maybe
Sure.
Someone who does have autism, or someone who's in a wheelchair, or someone who utilizes a service dog?
Yeah, absolutely. So we also followed through some other best practices. For our inclusive hiring events, we keep all of our candidates in the same room for their interviews that are back-to-back. That just makes it a lot easier for anyone who has a service dog or a mobility impairment or even an interpreter. They'd be able to just get settled into one space, and then we have our interviewers rotate to them. It's a really simple way to achieve a more inclusive experience, but it definitely goes a long way to help reduce some anxiety as well as some complications.
Okay, thank you so much. You all do some great things. So I'm writing notes too as well to share with folks when they ask me. But I want to talk about accommodation because more than likely for those who are listening or will be listening to the recording, they've already experienced someone coming forward, either an applicant or employee asking for a request, or will in the future, as Sarah talked about too. We've got an aging population and people are staying in the workplace just longer and longer, which increases the probability of having some type of need at some point for an accommodation. So I want to turn our attention to accommodations here. And so Sarah, first let's talk about how to define accommodation, and if you can give us some examples of what that looks like.
Absolutely, Julia. According to or under the ADA, the definition of an accommodation or a reasonable accommodation is a modification or adjustment to a job, the work environment, or the way things are usually done during the hiring process. One thing I always like to mention is that majority of accommodations cost $500 or less, and I want to emphasize that a lot of accommodations cost nothing at all. And I'm sure Lisa will be going into that as well, talking about the autism hiring program that they have at Microsoft, but just wanted to mention that. A lot of times when we think about accommodations, we think about something that's going to be really costly and involve a long process to review what that accommodation may be before approving that potentially for the individual or for the employee. That's not the case for a lot of requests. So an example of an accommodation with a cost associated, very simple, would be if an employee needs a standing desk. An accommodation that would cost nothing at all is if an employee has noise sensitivity or has ADHD and needs the option of a quiet office or space to work in if they are typically out on the floor, or permission to wear noise-canceling headphones that they may already own. So not even necessarily asking for the company to provide something like that. They may already have that what we are saying is an accommodation as noise-canceling headphones that they want to bring to work if employees don't typically wear headphones at work. Thus far, I wanted to call out as well, we've been talking about the inclusion of and accommodations for people who identify themselves having a disability, but I also wanted to call out caregivers when you think about creating an inclusive workplace and when we're talking about accommodations as well. So Julia mentioned it during my brief introduction at the beginning of this session, but I have been a caregiver to a family member in the past, and during that time I also needed accommodations with a flexible work schedule to take that family member to doctor's appointments, provide transportation, and anything else that was needed. So it completely shifted my schedule, and again, I personally don't identify as having a disability, but as somebody who has been a caregiver to family members with disabilities, it still applied to me. Knowing that I could go to my manager comfortably and disclose that that was happening in my life and that I needed those accommodations and make those requests was really important to me. And if I didn't feel comfortable, that would have probably resulted in a different outcome in terms of how I approached my day-to-day at work and how I was able to bring just my full self to work and really be here for my team and perform my responsibilities every day. So just a quick statistic, 6 in 10 caregivers are in the workforce present day, and a reminder that that can be an employee of any age. A lot of times I think we default to thinking about maybe somebody who's a little bit older who's therefore caring for a family member who's also aging, like a parent, and we don't typically think about people who are coming straight out of college and just entering the workforce, but that can apply to them as well, just from, again, that caregiver standpoint, let alone they themselves identifying as having a disability. But you could be providing care for a parent, again, or aging family member, to a child with a disability, or even a spouse with a disability as well. So I just wanted to mention all of that, again, as another population that disability inclusion can really apply to.
And thank you for that. And you mentioned just briefly PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So for those who aren't familiar with that, a lot of times we associate that with our returning veterans. And I just wanted to call your attention. I live in the New Orleans area, and so in 2005 we were struck with Hurricane Katrina, which devastated the area. And so we found a lot of people in this area. When I was doing counseling, we had quite a few patients coming in that suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder due to the floods and everything that they saw with that devastation. Even watching TV and over and over again trauma like 9/11, some people have post-traumatic stress disorder from simply watching that repeatedly over the news. And so it's something just to be aware of. More people than you probably think do have mental disorders, and a lot of times they go undiagnosed. But being flexible, like you said, being able to go to doctor's appointments and counseling sessions, and like you said, a lot of accommodations are completely free or very, very affordable. So even someone who suffers from migraines, like sense sensitivities, if someone is sitting in a cubicle by the exit door and people that smoke, that's the door they go through to smoke outside, and that smoke's coming inside the building into the office and triggering a migraine, an accommodation can be simply to move that person to another cubicle away from the door. So these are some things that we a lot of times don't think about as an accommodation and aren't tracking, and you really should. So Lisa, I want to ask you now, what are some best practices and examples of accommodations that Microsoft has made through its autism hiring program, or in general with anyone who has either a physical or mental disability?
Sure. So for the autism program specifically, we turned our interview process into a 5-day hiring cohort. We spend the first few days getting to know our candidates through different team building activities, and just gives our candidates the opportunity to demonstrate some of the skills that we would normally ask them to explain verbally in an interview scenario, which can be difficult for people with autism. During these first few days, we also provide resume tips and basic tips for technical interviewing. So in the event that they don't receive an offer with us, they're still better prepared moving forward in the job search. We find that people who are hired through our autism hiring cohorts, around 50% of them have actually applied before and not made it through the typical hiring process. So we talk about, how to talk about different gaps in your resume or non-traditional work experience, as well as give some tips for people on the autism spectrum when they're navigating the interview process. The third day is spent doing mock interviews, and this gives our candidates the opportunity to experience what a final round interview at Microsoft is like without the pressure of a hiring decision. All these interviewers doing mock interviews are trained technical interviewers, but they will not be making hiring decisions on behalf of the candidate and won't factor in at all. We found that incorporating this element decreases anxiety for final round interviews the following 2 days. I won't speak to what Microsoft as a whole has learned about accommodations. I can't speak speak to everyone, but I will say that the feedback we receive from interviewers and other participants is generally the same. They wish that all hiring events were run like this and that all candidates would benefit in some way from an experience that was designed more with their success in mind than as kind of a test. We really try to prepare our interviewers for this week to make sure that they're adjusting their style and providing kind of a collaborative environment rather than a testing scenario. And this really ensures that our candidates have all of those barriers to success, or I guess what we would call the front door experience into Microsoft, that we solve for that. And then once they're hired, once we've identified a candidate through the program, we also follow up and provide supports and accommodations through our benefits team. So they're matched with a community mentor at Microsoft, and that would be someone within the community, within the autism community, either someone who was hired previously through our program or a friend or parent of someone with autism, just so that they can understand better how the autism community is present at Microsoft, and also adjust to potentially relocating from a different area or potentially living on their own for the first time. That person is kind of designed to be a mentor in the Microsoft culture space and in the surrounding geographical area as well. They also their peer mentors and their team managers receive training before they're onboarded to understand fully what autism is as a culture, and then how to work with someone with autism and the autism in the workforce training as well. They also work with they also work with an external job coach at a non-government organization that we partner with, who can help bridge that gap between work and home, and as well as coach the new hire on different onboarding issues that might come up.
Well, thank you for that. I just wanted to mention that something that I heard you say more than once so far is training. And so I think that's very important, because I think, Lisa, a lot of times, and Sarah, organizations want to do the right thing. They do want to have an inclusive environment. They do want to hire people who have disabilities and other forms of diversity in the organization, but they don't understand the importance of training, or a lot of people have never interacted with someone with different types of disabilities, or maybe not know how to interact with someone with autism or even understand what that is because of stereotypes or what they see on TV and movies. And so I think it's great that you're doing that, and you see the importance of having people prepared and to understand and coaching them through that. I think that's great. Okay, so it's very helpful when we hear about real-life success stories, too, and I think the people listening would appreciate some of the stories that you might have to share. So I want to ask the two of you to give us some insight on what disability hiring success looks like. So let's start with you, Lisa. What are some key components to creating a successful recruiting and hiring initiative for individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, so I think on our own journey at Microsoft, we've been successful recruiting individuals with disabilities as an organization by being committed to inclusion at every stage. The hiring process is important as well, but if an employee joins a company after an inclusive experience in hiring and has a horrible time onboarding or assimilating into the company culture, it's essentially all for nothing, and we aren't able to retain people. So we're really committed to our employees and committed to making sure that they're able to bring their full selves to work. We have employee resource groups specific to disability segments and try to make it easy to find a community for everyone at work. And we're also committed to helping other individuals and companies pursue accessibility by building it into our technology and making it a priority. So it really starts, I would say, on our end, it started from the top down. And we've also found that attracting candidates with disabilities and partnerships with external organizations like Getting Hired and disability student organizations on campuses have helped us target the candidates that we're hoping to hire.
And just out of curiosity, I would imagine that you're tracking somehow whether or not it's successful. So is there a way that you define whether or not you had a successful year? Is it by number of people that you attract or hire, or an increase in the number of people that you're hiring with disabilities? Do you have any insight on what that looks like that might be able to help some people that are wanting to measure whether or not their program is successful?
So we're always trying to increase year over year, the number of hires through our specific programs. But currently, it's really hard for us to gauge how many people at Microsoft are working within the company that have disabilities. I mean, we're recruiting people with disabilities specifically for our programs, but we're hiring people with disabilities across the company that are finding us and getting in different roles that my specific programs might not be filling positions for. And we don't require anyone to disclose, and we don't require anyone to self-ID. So the numbers are not really reflective of what we would typically expect based on the population for what we have at Microsoft currently. But we're trying to use a lot of different avenues to encourage self-identification to really better serve our employees.
And you bring up a good point that's worth mentioning. A lot of people don't want to self-identify, especially at the applicant stage. They might feel that if I disclose that I have a physical or mental disability, then I might not be considered for the job. And then some people are more likely to self-identify after they're hired. And so that's the best practice to do that. And it's a requirement, actually, if you're a federal contractor. So I know Microsoft does that not only at the applicant stage, but after they're hired. And then if you're a federal contractor listening and you've got an affirmative action program for individuals with disabilities, you might already be aware that every 5 years as well, you've got to resurvey your current workforce. And that's because, like Sarah mentioned, maybe at the time that you started working at the organization, you did not have a disability, but maybe, later on, 5 years later or so, you've developed some type of disability, either from an injury or cancer, diabetes, et cetera, or were diagnosed with a mental disability, or you feel comfortable self-disclosing that information. And so just make sure that you're letting your employees know, and again, it's voluntary. But I believe that having programs such as what you have, Microsoft, and just being doing internal training on etiquette will increase the probability of someone wanting to self-disclose, because you're creating that inclusive environment where you're respecting all individuals, and that will definitely help you to get more people self-disclosing. So, Sarah, I want to turn over the next question to you. How can companies brand their organization to show that they are a disability-friendly employer? So I imagine that would be helpful in not just attracting applicants with disabilities, but that could also increase the chances of having a higher voluntary disclosure rate as well, as I just mentioned. So if you can talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I dive into that, just because we were on the topic of hiring programs and the autism hiring program that Microsoft has, we did receive a couple of questions, and I just wanted to keep us on topic there. And Lisa, if I can ask you a follow-up question, a lot of the information that we've received thus far is fantastic and really great to know, again, what Microsoft has achieved. And you all make it sound so easy when you talk about where you are right now, since the program has been established. But just bringing it back down to that basic question, and some of the questions I'm receiving are, how do you know where to start, or where's a good place to start? You mentioned even with an ERG or hiring program or some of the buy-in that you were able to get, it came top down. So if somebody wanted to engage a leadership member, is there a certain approach that you have that you can suggest, or what else can you speak to on, again, a good starting place?
Yeah, so really the inception of the program for us, it came through partnerships with different individuals in leadership, and those, that top-down model works a lot better. I would say, as far as engaging with leadership teams, I mean, you have to make the case, right? And typically, when we say make the case, we're talking about a bottom line. For us, it really had a lot to do with the fact that we're creating products for billions of people. Our mission is to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. And if we're not reaching every person on the planet, we're not doing that. If we're not hiring individuals with disabilities to work on our products, we're not creating inclusive products. We're really fortunate to have a CEO that is, really connected to this process as well. He has a son with a disability as well. So most of the time, anytime we would go to anyone, they would understand that this is a priority. We do things, and I don't know what other companies generally will call them, but on our side, we do road shows. So basically, that's just a presentation. You can speak to, the business impact. You can speak to the culture impact as well, including people benefits, not just the person that's being included, but the team as a whole. If you're bringing diverse populations, if that's neurodiversity, if it's diversity via disability, mobile, otherwise, you're bringing different perspectives to a group. And there's lots of different research available out there that can point to why that's beneficial for companies and beneficial for team environments. I would say start there, get some people engaged, and then you can also start at the bottom by, making suggestions to reform processes or reform things within the hiring process that may be not inclusive and may also be free to make an adjustment to. It's not easy to suggest that people should change the way that they do things, but once you have some success and you have some, things to point to as far as, attracting different types of talent, it's easier to make that case as well. So we've been in that process for a long time, engaging people all across the business, from leadership teams within, the hiring departments, HR, benefits, as well as, the product teams who are hiring the individuals, and we're at a good place now, but it's definitely been a journey and it takes a long time. So I don't mean to make it sound too easy.
But you mentioned one thing, and that is the importance of getting support from the top. Absolutely. I've seen organizations that struggle to get some really great ideas regarding attracting individuals with disabilities and other programs started because they just didn't get that type of support from the top. So I'm glad to hear that, and really for those that are wanting to start a program, start from the top, make your case for hiring individuals with disabilities. So there's some wonderful statistics to show you the value and to break the stigma that people and stereotypes that people often have about people with disabilities that just aren't true. So thank you for that. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Sarah, if you want to talk a little bit about branding, because that's an interesting thing. How do people know that we are a disability-friendly employer? Like Microsoft is doing some great things, but how do you get that message out?
Sure. And to add to the business case as well, and what Lisa said, and transitioning into that branding piece of showing that you're disability friendly and disability inclusive, just a reminder of how many people disability can apply to. We said the 1 in 5 Americans has a disability statistic, but when you think about that, and that's not including those who have not self-disclosed, it has not included those, again, who are caregivers necessarily, so it's a much larger number than that. And with, again, over 70% being non-apparent, you never know who potentially could have a disability that is already within your company or coming in as new talent. So when we talk about disability and that business case, I always say think about retention as well. So we know it costs about, I think, 6 to 9 months salary on average to turn over an employee when you think about the recruiting and the training resources that go into that. Retention is huge. It's not just about bringing in new talent into the company. Of course, that's a huge focus area, and we always want to bring in new talent into our organizations, but then retaining those that we've worked so hard to attract and to show that we are a great company to work for. That is, to us, part of the business case when we talk about it at Getting Hired, is showing those employees that they're at a great place to work and telling them and having them understand that they should want a lifetime career with us. And we do understand that disabilities come up and it can be acquired and things can happen. So that's just another talking point, hopefully to help everybody on the line when thinking about that business case and how many people this can impact. So with that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Sorry, Julia, were you saying something?
No, I was just going to say I see that the visuals here that are showing some of the success stories here about what Microsoft has been doing for individuals with some visual impairments. So what are some forms of social media that you're utilizing to get the word out, this type of message? Is it Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or all the above?
Absolutely. So we highly encourage and suggest that organizations use all social media platforms. That mainly includes Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, though there are Instagram pages as well. But Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter are the main social media platforms that organizations use and job seekers default to when looking for more information about an organization, to see more about your culture, about your brand, what they can look forward to when they start working with you. And so just, again, some simple math. Even if you have, let's say, 10,000 followers on Twitter and 1 in 5 have a disability, that's potentially a really large pool of candidates that you could be tapping into from that pipeline standpoint. And just in general, having 10,000 followers, that's a large audience in general to have your eyes on your brand. So if you are only talking about available positions on your Twitter channel, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and you're not talking about here's our commitment to hiring individuals with disabilities, or here's our focus on bringing more people with disabilities into the workplace and some of the things that we're doing, like Lisa mentioned, and Julia, you as well, providing disability etiquette training to our current employees, or even sitting in on a session like today's. Here are things that we're actively doing to create that inclusive culture within the workplace. That's a very easy win and potentially missed opportunity. So a couple other high-level examples of what you can do to showcase that brand. We already talked about reasonable accommodations. Making sure that you have your accommodation statement in an easy-to-find place on your website, and having a dedicated page for inclusion and diversity and disability on your site as well are two really easy wins. So that's a piece of homework I would love to give everybody on the line today, is to put yourself in the shoes of a job seeker, go onto your website and see how quick and easy it is for you to find your organization's accommodation statement, and even test that out as well. If you have a phone number tied to that, there should ideally be 2 methods of contact, or 2 forms of contact, an email and a phone number for accessibility reasons if a job seeker needs to reach out to somebody. Test that out and see what the turnaround time is for a response back to you. Take a look at that accommodation process. And then it's really all about highlighting that to, again, those existing employees and externally as well. So if you have a really robust accommodation process, or let's say you just made some updates to it, I would highly suggest that you communicate that out through your internal communications team to all of your existing employees, and think about, when's the last time you saw that? If something happened and you needed to request an accommodation, would you know where to go? And then for your potential candidates and external population, what do they know about your accommodation statement? Do they know that you have one, that you have a process? Is it just assumed? Those are some really simple things that you can do to showcase that brand and focus on inclusion.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because one thing that I do like to do when people ask me, can you tell me if my hiring process is compliant with regulations on equal opportunity, one thing I do like to do is test out. So you're asking people to test that out. I encourage you that too. I ditto that, because sometimes, recently, I called a number that was listed on a client's site, and it was a wrong number. So if you have the wrong number on your website, there's no way that you can assist someone with a disability. But 99% of the times that I'm checking to see if that accommodation process works, either I'm not getting a response, or I'm getting an inappropriate response by someone who's waiting way too long to respond to me, or they have no idea what to do to help me out. So I just want to clarify, just having that statement on your website is not enough. You need to make sure that you're responding in a timely manner, and that you know what to do, and when you do communicate with someone requesting an accommodation because of a disability. So now let's turn our attention to you, Lisa, and if you can talk to us about how important is internal culture, in your opinion, to attract, hire, and retain individuals with disabilities.
Thanks. I mean, I would say it's really essential. If a company is hostile to candidates and employees with disabilities or biased, it really shows in every step in the process. It's essential to have, that key support and leadership like we were talking about for the initiative to ensure success. We've worked with executive sponsors for our programs, and they've been really instrumental in launching and growing our hiring numbers. They can help with everything from funding, securing teams to participate, influencing groups to help produce and take training, and help individual employees see the value in the work. Internal culture can also impact that rate of self-identification within a company like we were talking about earlier. And we're really better able to connect our coworkers to the resources that they need and facilitate relationships with employee resource groups when they disclose their disability. So that self-identification piece is crucial. But again, the culture can really make or break any hiring initiative. Like Sarah was saying, as far as retention goes, we definitely have to have that piece figured out in order to have successful programs.
Yeah, excellent. And I do want to just highlight that we're asking the question about attracting, hiring, and retaining. So many times companies don't, they put all their attention on recruiting, and who do we hire, but they don't think about for a moment, what are we doing to keep that talent that it took us a while to be able to get, or that we finally are able, they're coming in, we want to keep this talent, and they just miss it. They don't think about it. So please do focus some time on thinking about how you can make that in culture such that people want to stay. That's so important. Now, this next one, we talked a little bit about disability etiquette training. I know Lisa mentioned before that people that do hiring interviews are trained on disability etiquette. But Sarah, can you talk to us a little bit more about why providing disability etiquette training is important for every employee, not just those who are interviewing candidates?
Yeah, that's absolutely a great point, is the importance of disability etiquette training for everybody, not just recruiters and hiring managers. So like I mentioned, providing disability etiquette training or sitting in on sessions like today's session is a great way to further create a culture of inclusion. Setting a bit of a scenario, if I am an employee with a disability that has not self-disclosed, perhaps due to fear of stigma or being treated differently, I'm not sure how my colleagues will perceive me or my manager will perceive me or how they feel about disability in general. I might feel different, after knowing that I just participated in a disability etiquette or inclusion training with the rest of my team or company. Knowing that everybody now has the same baseline of knowledge on how many people have a disability, what some unconscious biases are, that might make me feel more comfortable to talk about it, especially if the training promoted a conversation amongst the team already. So after today's webinar, if you're sitting in on this session with a number of your colleagues or teammates and immediately afterwards you at least have one thing to talk about, I, as somebody with a disability, didn't even have to prompt that conversation, and you can hear everybody else talking about it. It's the conversations and it's the talking, and really what Lisa had mentioned going along with this point, that starts to create that inclusive culture and starts to create that change. And when it's talked amongst employees, then that shows a larger interest, and it helps to make that business case to get buy-in from leadership as well, if you don't already have that buy-in. Now, training is extremely useful for recruiters and hiring managers. I do want to call those two groups out specifically, because they could be interacting with a candidate with a parent or not a parent disability at any time. As the recruiter, you're really the face of the company, since you're the first person to talk to the candidate and to reach out to them. So it's important for you to feel comfortable on what to do in scenarios where a candidate may use a relay caller or may have an interpreter, or if they have a gap in work history on their resume due to personal medical leave, or again, taking time to care for a family member if that person was a caregiver. So knowing what is and what is not appropriate to ask during a phone screening or phone interview, or when you're even looking at a resume, thinking about those things can potentially result in you having a larger pool of candidates, because you're not omitting resumes where you thought, hey, this person has a gap in work history, I don't know why, I'm going to move on to the next person, but now having a different perspective on this person may have had to leave due to medical. So let me keep that in mind, but take a deeper look at their resume and spend a couple extra seconds or minutes on it. That now brings that person back into the running and has made your recruiting process a little bit more inclusive.
And that's a great point, because I bet I didn't think about that. If I was looking at a resume and there was a gap in employment, that it could be for reasons other than what some people think, that the person got fired and just wasn't a good employee or jumped from job to job. So we shouldn't be so quick to come to a conclusion, is what it sounds like you're saying. So we should really be asking questions to try to understand that and be more open to what might possibly be going on there. And so, Lisa, can you tell us about what are some common misconceptions regarding working with individuals with disabilities? I'm guessing at the very beginning, once this program rolled out, some people might have not ever worked with someone with autism, so for example. So can you talk to us a little bit about maybe some concerns that people have or some common misconceptions that you hear about working with individuals with disabilities?
Sure. So for the autism program specifically, the feedback that we get more generally, especially from engineers at Microsoft, is that after they've gone through the program or they've received the training and they hear about, working with someone with autism, their immediate reaction is generally, oh, I think I have like 3 or 4 people on my team already that might fit this description. So it ends up being really beneficial, especially in our community, for people to really understand how best to work with even the people that are already on their team, and to develop interpersonal working relationships that are more productive. I would say our other disability hiring programs, our cross-disability segment hiring program, the most common misconception or bias that I see from hiring managers is around relocation and travel. Without interviewing a candidate or giving a candidate to, elect for themselves, oftentimes our partners will, in recruiting or in hiring, will ask, is the candidate open to relocating or able to travel, which is not something that I would get. I'm coming from a university recruiting background, and that question was not one that I would get from people at all otherwise. So when concerns like this arise, we try to redirect and make sure the individual knows that we're hiring based on the ability to perform core functions of the job. That can sometimes be a concern that people raise for any affirmative action type programs like this. There's an immediate knee-jerk reaction to think that we're somehow hiring or somehow lowering the bar for our candidates, and that's not the case at all. We're just providing a more inclusive experience. We're still holding them to the same standards that we would hold any candidate to, and asking them to perform the same functions of the job as well. So the candidate has visibility into the job description, which includes, the percentage of time necessary to travel, as well as the location of the position, and would not be applying if they weren't interested in that specific position. So ultimately, on my team, it's our responsibility to make sure all of our employees have the necessary accommodations to perform those core job functions, and we take steps to ensure that this is possible by having a centrally funded accommodation budget and promoting disclosure through resource communities.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa. And thank you both, Lisa and Sarah, for going through these different questions, answering some pretty important questions. At this time, I want to turn it over to Sarah to see if we've got any questions coming through.
Yes, we absolutely have some questions, and I know we have about 6 minutes left. Before we dive into those, I did want to mention to everybody, so this training is HRCI and SHRM eligible for credits. We will send the codes afterwards, and again, we are recording this training and we'll be able to send a link to that as soon as possible. We are not sending a copy of the presentation deck. We have the recording in place of that. A couple of questions that we received, one being, what are some ways to improve the inclusive hiring experience with a limited budget or limited resources? So again, I think just bringing us back down to basics on where do you start? What is a good starting place? Lisa and Julia, I'll just kick it off by saying, again, take a look at what you already have in terms of resources or initiatives in place. Again, something as simple as that accommodation statement. Take a look at how accessible that is. Has that been communicated? externally and internally. Make sure that your recruiters and hiring managers have attended a disability etiquette training. That's something that I know that we offer through Getting Hired. There are other avenues as well, but we're more than happy to provide a list of resources if anybody has any questions. But there definitely are resources and tools out there for you from an education standpoint. I think education is really helpful in answering this for how to create that inclusive hiring experience and make sure everybody feels prepared. But Lisa and Julia, I didn't know if you had any other thoughts on this question.
Well, I wanted to just go ahead, Lisa.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, but there are a lot of different simple things that you can do. Bringing it back to the sourcing piece, if you're providing an inclusive experience, you're also training your recruiters and sourcers to be inclusive in the way that they review resumes. And we talked about gaps in work experience, maybe non-traditional work experience. Giving people a chance more proactively can definitely include more people with disabilities. And then on the interviewing side, things as simple as providing longer breaks in between interviews and allowing candidates to stay in the same room for the entire time that they're interviewing. If you have interviews back to back, free and effective, and making a better experience for candidates.
It's just something that I remember doing years ago when I was in a management role. We didn't have a formal type of diversity program, but because we're a relatively small office where I am. But one thing that I thought, because we were interacting and teaching about interacting with individuals with disabilities, and so we invited someone who was an expert about talking about that, someone who actually worked in the rehabilitation department at our local university, and for free, this person was more than happy to come out and talk to us about some common misconceptions and how to interact with people, in a way that is inclusive. And so basically the etiquette piece. So these are things, I think a lot of people think I have to have a budget to be able to do this. It costs us absolutely nothing to have this person come and talk to us. We took a lunchtime, so it was a brown bag lunch and learn type situation. That person enjoyed educating us, and we enjoyed learning what we can do to be more understanding of working with people with all types of abilities.
Thank you both. I think those are some great answers. And to expand on what you said, Lisa, as well, just providing a little bit more time between interviews as well if somebody needed to recollect themselves, or if they do have anything as a disability that makes them a little bit more sensitive to interactions, to engagements, and they need, again, some time to decompress afterwards. That's also an example to me of something that could make the experience better for everybody, having a disability or not, as a lot of these accommodations, and especially those that don't cost anything, that we're talking about. So all great suggestions. Another question that we had received was, what are some ways that my business can prioritize disability education in our culture? It seems like there are a lot of initiatives at any one given time within an organization. So it's kind of speaking to that business case again, but what are those ways that you can help make that case and prioritize disability inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, you have to develop that pitch, and how it's relevant specifically to your company. For us, it's relevant because we're creating products that need to be utilized, or preferably would be utilized by everyone. I don't know how many of you have Outlook on your computer or use it for work, or PowerPoint. But these are the types of things that people have integrated into the workforce and into their internal culture as well. And we're building out tools for these tools to make sure that everyone is able to use them, as well as create presentations or create content that is accessible for other people. So for us, we have to have people with disabilities incorporated into our workforce. So the best place to start, I would say, is just by gathering, that information, the research, and presenting that business case.
I agree with what she says. I don't have much more to add to that. That was pretty good.
Great. And we are right at time. We're right at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Lisa and Julia, I wanted to thank you both again for all of your participation, your advice, your consultation. I think a lot of great information came out of today's session. So if anybody did not have the chance to ask a question, or if we did not get to your question, we will follow up with you directly afterwards. You can expect an email from me, and we will send out, again, those codes for the credits along with the training link as well. But Julia and Lisa, and to everyone who attended, I wanted to thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Julia.